Good morning, dolls, and welcome to Little Gretchen's workshop. So today we're going to make some accessory pieces or components for doll dressing and primarily components for the men's clothes. I need to make some suspenders and I also need to make some buttons in multiple colors. So I'm going to show you how to do that today. Now I had an assortment of buckles that my daughter actually purchased for me off of Temu, and I began trying to make little suspenders using various shades of satin ribbon. And I realized that the satin ribbon actually was too wide for the opening inside the little buckles. And I tried several different ways to get the ribbon inside the buckle, and I finally concluded that it was just too wide. So I went on to try something else. Now I recently got a suggestion from one of my dolls as far as using brown paper bag or other things to simulate leather, where you put the Mod Podge on the paper and allow it to dry, similar to how I did when I made the hats from brown paper bag. And all those are definitely an effective technique, but I actually have leather and I also have faux leather, so I'm going to use those as my material of choice in this video. So I took a thin piece of scrap leather that I had and trimmed off a really thin piece that would be small enough to fit inside the buckle opening. Now, dolls, you know I have a tendency to not measure, but I do believe the opening for these little buckles is about 3 millimeters. So if you use this process, definitely measure if you need to. And after I cut the little piece, I threaded it through the little buckle and I was able to adjust it. And I think that'll look really nice when I create my men dolls to make it look like their suspenders have buckles on them. I have made suspenders for my dolls previously, but I've never made buckles for them before. So I really feel like this is going to be a really nice upgrade for the detailing of my men dolls outfits. Now, I went on to repeat the process with the pewter looking buckles, and then I did a few with the brassy or gold looking buckles with the lighter leather, and I was more or less using the suede side, but you could use the leathery side of the leather. I think both sides look really nice. The part that was most amusing to me about this project is that I consistently cut the little straps the right size so I didn't have to recut them to make them fit. Plus, I'm doing this ahead of time, so when I begin to dress the men dolls, it'll save me a lot of time. Now, after making several sets of the suspenders, I realized I hadn't made a belt. I definitely feel like a belt is a very distinctive accessory for the men dolls, so I will make some and actually put them throughout the houses, but none of my men dolls actually wear belts. They all wear suspenders. So you're going to use the same process. You actually, rather than threading it through, you're just going to put the buckle right on the tip and you're going to thread it through just a little bit and then fold it over. Now, after you fold it over, you're going to need to add a little dab of glue to lock it down on the other side of itself to stay in place or stay on the end of the strip of leather. And just like that, you have a tiny belt. Now you can add little holes or markings on it to make it look more realistic. You can add something to the tip, but that's the basic design for a belt or suspenders. Now the other details, I will add more when I actually put them on the dolls. Now this first process, I was showing you how to do this with actual leather or real leather, but the process for doing it with faux leather is exactly the same. The biggest difference is generally you can only use one side of the leather. The other side is more or less considered the wrong side, and that's something you'll primarily want to camouflage. But you do it the exact same way. One thing I will say about faux leather, it's a little bit firmer and it's actually easier to thread through the buckle than the actual leather that's really thin and soft. But the process is exactly the same. In this instance, I just made a couple pair of suspenders. I didn't make any belts with the faux leather because the faux leather doesn't quite drape like the natural leather would. I actually want to use the natural leather belts to like hang over hooks or doorknobs because the natural leather is more pliable and easier to shape and drape in a natural way in your scenes. I honestly really do like this dark faux leather color because it looks really rich when I use the darker buckle and the darker leather, and it actually gives a different profile and finish because it's slightly shiny. But either of these options will be perfect for putting on the dolls to create the look of suspenders or belts for your dolls. Although I'm using them for belts and suspenders, you can definitely use this technique for luggage or even for miniature horses to create a bridle or saddle bag, and even to make a dog collar. So let me show you some of the other things I made. So the other thing that was always really challenging for me when I created Dollhouse dolls and their clothes were buttons. For many years I drew buttons on and even sometimes resorted to using seed beads, which is still a great option. But my very kind and generous friend Nessie from Nessie Monster Crafts made me some lovely buttons that she sent me in a gift with some toy soldiers, and the buttons were so fine and so perfect I couldn't imagine how she made them, and she told me they were made of polymer clay. I was not only impressed by the tiny perfect buttons she had made, but I was also inspired to go ahead and create some on my own. So this first set of buttons I wanted to be kind of clear, sort of translucent to look like shirt buttons. So I just rolled out a small piece of translucent clay. And after I got it to the desired thickness, I took my tiniest circle cutter and began to press out tiny circles. Now, it would have been a best practice to put a little talcum powder on the little cutters to prevent the clay from sticking in the holes. In colder months, you may not have to do it so much because the clay is firmer, but it was pretty warm this day and the clay definitely was having more of a tendency to stick. But it didn't stop me. I forged ahead and did several different color buttons because of all the projects I have to do. And after the clay was baked and cooled, I punched it out of the little holes, and I have a handful of clear, translucent buttons for my dolls' shirts and other tiny outfits. Now, this is an example of a folded shirt, and I will leave a link in the description of how I made that. And if you look really closely, you can see the buttons have little holes in them. I didn't go all the way through, but I did use a straight pin to put hole indentions in them so that it'll look as though they go all the way through, which is definitely an option with this technique. Now, dolls, try to roll your clay as even as possible so that your buttons will have a consistent thickness and an in-scale profile. Now, really quick, I want to show you how I make my little bow ties for the men dolls. And I have some little gross grain ribbon, which actually has white polka dots on one side and it's solid on the other side. I just add a little glue. Now, I do add glue to the edges so that it won't fray, but I first start out by adding glue to the center so that I can pinch it with my tweezers to create the bow effect. Now you will have to hold it for a few seconds until the glue catches. After the pinch part gets pretty set, I get a tiny piece of silk ribbon, usually 3 millimeter, and wrap it around the center of the bow to finish it off. Now you will need to practice with this. It's pretty tedious. Usually I make my bow a little bit bigger than I need it to be and then trim it down to size. Now after I'm done and I trim it down to the size that I want it to be, I do add a little additional tacky glue to the ends just to ensure that it doesn't fray or ravel. And just like that, red bows for everyone. I just want to give a special shout out to Nessie at Nessie Monster Crafts for the inspiration of making these buttons today. Thanks, Nessie. Now, dolls, if you've enjoyed this video today, let me know in the comments. And if you want to see more content like this, go ahead and subscribe. And always look for me on Mondays and Wednesdays after 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I'm looking forward to seeing you all on the next episode of Little Gretchen's Workshop. Bye-bye now, dolls.